This is episode 14 of Old Man Yells, and I'm Bob Burnett from Barefoot Mining. Today, we're going to dig deeper into pools. This is episode 2 of a 3-part series on pools. First one, we explored really why pools exist, and the moral of that story is cash flow. If you'd like to look deeper into that, I recommend you go back to episode 13. But today, we're going to dig into the mining process and then finish with what I feel is a very concerning and important topic for everybody in the Bitcoin community to be aware of. It involves censorship. Let's start, though, with some terms and definitions and some of the basics of the mining process. So imagine that out there, a block is being mined. Certainly that is actually true. But as this block is trying to be mined, the world continues. New business is happening and new transactions are being issued. Now, each node, and there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of them, maintains a mempool. And that mempool is a repository of all the transactions that have yet to be confirmed. As new transactions are made, the initiating node updates its local mempool, then typically will broadcast that transaction to the rest of the nodes, and it starts propagating through the Bitcoin ecosystem and ultimately should reach all of the nodes. But it does mean that at any one point in time, not necessarily all of the nodes have the same mempool. In fact, they don't. They're largely similar, but they are different. Amongst those nodes are a small group of very special nodes because they are the ones operated by the pools. Each pool then has its own version of the mempool. Now, if we pretend that at this instant a new block has just been mined, all of these pool operator nodes then immediately take action. And what do? The first thing they'll do is start to resolve the transactions from the mine block, meaning they have to update their mempool to remove those that were in the block. And then what they'll do is they'll send a message out to all the miners within their pool and say, stop working. And they will push to them a blank template with absolutely nothing in it. They'll then start working on a new template, this one full of transactions. And it will take them a few seconds to assemble that. So in the meantime, the miners are typically working on a blank template. And that's why, as a side note, occasionally you will see a blank block get mined. But if you'll notice, those almost always occur within a second or two of the previous block. So they're like bam, bam. And what it means is that before the pool issued the full template for the miners to work on, the empty one got solved. Now, the miners, as they're assembling the full template, we'll call it that, they can select whatever they wish. They essentially just have to follow the rules of 4 million weight unit capacity. And that translates typically to about 2,700 transactions, but it can be 5,000 or 6,000 if they're all very small. And it could be as little as 1 if it's very big. Seen that in the ordinals world as well. Now, with that kind of as a background, let's talk about the state of pools. In the past week, only 15 different companies have found a block. Very small number. So when I talked about those special nodes, there are only really 15 of them in the world. Now, of the 15 pools in the world, The top 5 have an overwhelming majority. They have 85% of the hash rate. They mine 85% of the blocks. Those pools, by the way, are Foundry, which is a US-based pool, and then 4 Chinese pools. See if I can remember them. Binance, Ant Pool, F2 Pool, and Via BTC. Number 6, it happens to be Luxor, another US pool. Now, this 85% raises a lot of eyebrows. Often people have risen eyebrows about it because they've speculated about things like 51% attack. Maybe defer a longer conversation on that to another day. In my opinion, it's a very unlikely scenario and not really worthy of extensive discussion at the moment. But I do think front and center are issues concerning privacy, security, and especially censorship. Now, some will also say censorship is a concern, that there'll always be a pool that will pick up censored transactions. And especially if the sender, who's, let's say, on a blacklist and whose transaction is not going through, they can always add fees, and eventually there will be somebody to pick it up. I think this is one of those kind of, in theory, it's true, but in practice, a lot messier. So imagine, especially, a world where not just 1 or 2 transactions are blacklisted, but thousands or tens of thousands. And also, let's assume that the mempool itself is also massively backlogged. Many of you have probably heard me talk about that. I believe that is coming. So the combination of those 2 things could make people who are in a censored position or blacklisted position really find the network not working well for them. It could be a massive disincentive for them to participate in the network. And it could shake the confidence of a lot of people in the network. Now, I believe that this problem is a lot more near term than maybe some people think. In fact, we'll talk about in a second, there is some censorship going on today, and it can be confirmed. But before we get to that, some will say, well, if that starts to happen, the miners will rebel against the pools and move their hash rate to a new pool. Again, something that is true theoretically and probably over the long term true, but in the short to medium term, maybe doesn't work as well. So the first reason why is that a lot of large miners, and the truth is that's where a lot of the hash rate sits today with large miners, they have special deals with the pools, and those give them access to very low fees. So they have an economic incentive to stay where they are, even if that pool is censoring. The second is that's often coupled with a contractual obligation to direct hash to the pools. Part of the reason they get the low rate is because they are contributing a large amount of hash to the pool, and the pool looks at that in a very favorable light. Even if a large miner was inclined to change, though, there may not be a place for them to change to. You see, most pools today are KYC pools. And the KYC process required by most pools is quite extensive. At Barefoot, we have actually stopped working with a couple pools because their KYC process is so cumbersome and burdensome that it becomes a material issue to our resources. It's a process that can take weeks. It requires a massive amount of information. Depending on how your organization is set up, it can get very complex and require even personal information from individual owners within the organization. And in the end, it's also a permission system, meaning that even if you go through the KYC process, it doesn't mean that you're going to be approved. The pool then decides if they want the miner. It's not the other way around. The miner doesn't decide to join the pool. The pool decides to accept the miner. So again, this thought that, well, if miners see things happening, they can just move quickly. Well, it's not so easy. That's something that really has to be planned well in advance. But censorship is a front and center issue right now. It's not theoretical. On November 22nd, F2 pool, the third largest pool in the world, was called out for filtering 6 OFAC sanctioned transactions. This is fact. In fact, it was confirmed by the co-founder of F2 Pool, who stated that he was refusing to confirm transactions for criminals, dictators, and terrorists. Shortly after that, he sent another tweet stating he was disabling the filter until the community reaches a more comprehensive consensus. By the way, I tried to state both of those verbatim. I don't want to paraphrase him, but the comments about refusing to confirm transactions and also disabling the filter, I believe I have restated verbatim. If you would like the actual quotes, look on my Twitter feed and you'll find reposts of those tweets. You may not have heard about this, though. And that kind of bothers me. You know, in the fiat world, things happen where the masses and the media will spend more time on whoever Taylor Swift happens to be dating at the moment and ignore the election of a radical new type of politician. And by the way, I don't mean radical in a negative sense. I mean somebody blowing up the establishment, an anti-status, an anarcho-capitalist, being elected in Argentina. You know, Taylor Swift's dating history is more relevant, I think, to most people in the world than a G20 company electing somebody who wants to blow up their central bank, figuratively, and change the destiny of his country. That's not surprising. It's the world we live in. But I am a bit surprised that in the Bitcoin community, things like the Binance story and CZ, which I'm not saying are irrelevant, but in the long run, that's not an important story. It doesn't have any lasting impact. A story of a pool censoring transactions, that's a big issue. That's where I believe, as a community, we should be really putting deep thought, having deep conversations, and realizing that material decisions have to be made by all of us at an individual level because of this. So I want to go a little deeper into that. So as I said, there's 15 pools today making all the decisions about what transactions get served. The third largest pool in the world admitted they are filtering based on their moral judgments. And this is where things get complex, even for me. I want to state that I respect the right of any block template creator, including F2 Pool, to use whatever criteria they wish to make templates. I view this as an extension of free speech and free will. Traditionally, you would expect block template creators to largely pick those transactions with the higher fees. But certainly, when they have their own transactions to make, they pick their own. If they happen to have friends that they want to give a sweetheart deal to, fine. If they want to include ordinals, fine. If they only want to pick transactions made on Tuesdays, fine. I believe that's their right. However, I believe it is morally wrong to use money or a monetary system as a weapon or means of control. For me, any block template creator using their position to restrict access to the network is inflicting harm. It's behaving outside the ethos, and it is a form of violence. To me, this is no different than a bank or credit card company canceling someone's account because they said something against a politician or a policy. You know, hat tip to the folks up in Canada, for instance, during the COVID crisis, who went through this in real life. By extension, because all block template creators today are pools, any minor contributing hash rate to a censoring pool is participating in this violence and is participating in the suppression of rights and freedom. And by further extension, anyone owning stock in a company that contributes hash to a censoring pool is also guilty of this violence and is living outside the ethos. Think about this. Make your own decision. Choose whichever path you wish. It's your life, it's your morals, it's your ethics. But don't think this is someone else's problem and that censorship will not impact you or the people you care about. I'm here to help Bitcoin become the monetary system for the next 1,000 years. It's my hope for my kids and my grandkids, the future of the world. This is an existential issue in my mind. But in the end, Bitcoin will be what you make it. So choose wisely.